welcome back to Marquee Graphics. My name is Mark, and today we're going to start part one of a three-part series on Adobe Photoshop's toolbar. Now, that may seem like that is a lot of videos for what is essentially one part of Adobe Photoshop, but let me tell you, I filmed this all in one video, and it came out to be about an hour. So I figured I'd split it into three 20-minute sections, somewhere around there, about three 20-minute sections, to make it a little bit more palatable for most people. So this is by no means going to be a 100% comprehensive video on the toolbar, but it does cover most of what you need to know if you are beginning Photoshop. So sit back, get a cup of coffee, maybe a little notebook to take some notes, and welcome to part one of the Adobe Photoshop toolbar from Marquee Graphics. What we're going to talk about today is going to be the toolbar and a lot of the little tools that exist in the toolbar. By no means is this going to be 100% an extensive look at the toolbar, but we are going to cover a lot of it. And hopefully what this is going to do is give you an idea of what a lot of these tools do. Now, my toolbar is set up a little bit differently because I've customized it in order to facilitate what I do. That's something that you can also do as well. But the general overview of how Photoshop works with regard to the toolbar should be explained in this video. We are going to go over the layers palette in a different video, and that's extraordinarily important, and we'll go over most of the functions in that. But today we're going to stick with just the toolbar. So the toolbar is arranged in this vertical setup here. And as I had talked about in the previous video, the difference between this and the kind of legacy layout is if you click on this little set of arrows right here, what that'll do is it'll put it in kind of this legacy mode. And the reason that this would be considered legacy is because this is the way that Photoshop used to handle the toolbar. There didn't used to be a vertical version of the toolbar. The reason that you have this really thin toolbar is because as laptops started getting more and more powerful, people started doing more and more work on laptops, and screen real estate was really precious. So what they decided to do was to thin out the toolbar, or at least give the option to thin out the toolbar. You'll find this in a lot of the other menus as well. This is your move tool. This very first one that we have right here, that's the move tool, and it does exactly what it says. It moves objects. Now, we really can't talk about the move tool without talking about the selection tools. So the selection tools basically draw out selections. And so you can see here, these are the marching ants. This indicates a selection. We can put it against a darker value over here, and you can see it a little bit better. This is what a selection looks like. If you're on any selection tool, you can actually move a selection. Whereas if you're on a move tool, you'll move what is inside that selection. So the move tool does a lot of different things. And if we have an object on a layer by itself, and like I said before, what we're going to do is we're going to go over layers in a different video. But if you have an object on a layer by itself, the move tool can be used to move that around and so on. But that's kind of what the move tool actually does. Now, below that, we have these marquee tools. The marquee tools allow you to draw out shapes. So in this particular case, I'm drawing out a rectangle. I can also draw out an ellipse. And if I want, I can actually add or subtract from these. If I hold down Shift, I'll add to it. If I hold down Option, I will subtract from it. These are Mac keyboard shortcuts, by the way. And I can do this with basically any selection tool. Now, the lasso tools, and let's say the lasso tool and the polygonal lasso tool and the magnetic lasso tool, what these do is they allow you to kind of freeform draw out a selection. Same principles apply. If I want to add to it, I can hold down Shift and add to it. If I want to subtract, I can hold down Option and subtract from it. You don't have to be on the same tool in order to do this. You can mix tools, like I had the Lasso tool here, and if I want to add to this, I can go to the Marquee tool, and as long as I'm holding Shift down, I can add to it. And as long as I hold Option down with any tool, as long as it draws out a selection, I can subtract from it. Now, the polygonal lasso tool, what this does is this allows you to essentially draw out a selection, but do it in kind of a hard-edged way. You might say to yourself, when in the world am I ever going to use this? You will use it a lot, believe it or not. You always have some type of a hard-edged object like a box that you'll want to surround with a selection, and you won't want to go in and use the pen tools, which we'll get into in just a little while. And this is just a very quick way of being able to select. The other one that's underneath here, the magnetic lasso tool, what this allows you to do is to go along edges of objects, and it allows you to select these. Now, for a very kind of quick and dirty selection, this is great because it allows you to go in and very quickly select something. It's not always the best way to select things because it's not incredibly accurate. It's gotten a lot better over time, but overall, it's not incredibly accurate most of the time. The reason that this is working pretty well, and I chose this image to demo this, is because there's an extreme difference between the object that I'm trying to select and the background. So the tool is able to discern between what I'm considering a subject matter and the background, and it can do it pretty easily. Once you get into things that are of similar value, in other words, they are similarly dark or light or some really complex things, tends to falter a little with that. But as far as getting a very quick selection with something that is against something of a contrasting color or a lighter value, this is pretty good. It does a decent job. For the next set of tools that we're going to be talking about, these very quick selection tools, which involves like the quick selection tool and the magic wand tool. There are some other tools that reside underneath this. We're only going to talk about these two because I think that this kind of covers a lot of what those tools do. So in order to understand how this works, let's take a look at this image in black and white. So the reason why we're doing this is because these selection tools, these kind of quicker selection tools, this is how these tools view Photoshop. They view it as a value. In other words, how light or how dark the image is, and in different parts of the image, how light or how dark it is. So right now we have this white background, which is a much lighter value, and let's say that we have this darker shape over here, that's a much darker value. So what a tool like the quick selection tool does is it says, okay, you're going to click right here, and all of these pixels that are in here, we're going to select all of them that look just similar, that are similar darkness, and where we're going to stop with that selection is when you hit something that is dramatically different, like this white background. So if I click in here, you can see it'll select this. And if I do this, even on one that's a little bit lighter value, that's closer to white, it will do the exact same thing. That's how these tools look at Photoshop images. So let's go back then to the color version of this. And you can see here, even though it's in color, that tool is still looking at this as if it's in black and white. So it's saying, okay, darker area versus lighter area. Slightly darker area than the background, we're still going to just be able to select that. So the next one that we'll talk about is the Magic Wand tool. And the Magic Wand tool does something very similar. It looks at the image as if it's black and white, and it selects based upon that. But there's a big difference in that you can adjust the variation between what it will consider selectable and what it doesn't consider selectable. So the point being with both of these tools is that they're good for selections when you have something that is a very different contrasting element against white, black, whatever it is. But when you're talking about something that has all sorts of different areas of value, it just gets confused. The tool is not smart enough to be able to select, let's just say, this part of the pineapple. Once we get to an area down here like this, it has problems. And even if we adjust that tolerance, it's going to have a problem. And what you're going to find is that there are other tools that are much better at selecting this type of thing. If you want to go in and just select objects like this, the Magic Wand tool or the Quick Selection tool are fantastic. Otherwise, you're going to want something that's a little bit more accurate. So the next one that we're going to look at is the cropping tool. Now, the cropping tool does exactly what it sounds like. It crops an image. If we click on this, you can see by default, we have these little handles that are here, and these little handles will actually aid you in making the crop size. So we could go in and we could, let's say, if we wanted to crop the entire image like this, we could, and if you just double click on the inside or hit return, it will crop the entire image. Now, what you need to understand is that if you have this checked, which I believe by default it's checked, which is delete cropped pixels, it gets rid of everything beyond the edge here. Whenever this is clicked, you have to commit to the idea that this is as big as the image is ever going to be if you do that. The reason that you would want to have this clicked is because it does affect image size if you have an image beyond your viewable canvas. So that's something that you need to take into consideration, depending on how big something is that you're working with and so on. But let's say that we go in again and we've got our crop tool here. Some of the things that I want to show you is that right here, we have essentially a grid. So these are all compositional grids, and these are things that throughout different design or photography classes, you'll learn a lot more about composition. I may do a video on composition at some point, but for right now, let's say that we click on this and you see that you've got these lines here. This is what's known as the rule of thirds, and it's a compositional tool. Now, if you don't like the rule of thirds, you can go to different grids. You can do what is referred to as the golden ratio and the golden spiral. This is something that people use for different levels of composition and so on. It's really helpful if you really want to focus on specific areas of an image and draw the eye. That's a totally different lecture, but these are really valuable tools to have. You can also turn these off if you want to, so you have a lot of different options. One of the things that I did want to show you is that up here, you can actually change the ratio to square, 5:7, 16:9, so on. Or you can go in and say, I want a specific inch or pixel width or whatever. You can have it here. And then, of course, this is the way that you can clear those. So lots of really cool options. The crop tool didn't always have a lot of these options, so it's kind of nice to have them now. I use these all the time when I go to crop, and it's a really valuable tool for you to know. The eyedropper tool, which is right here, there are a lot of different options under the eyedropper tool. What I'm going to do is really just cover the very first one. The others really depend on you knowing other functions in Photoshop, and I don't want to get into those at the moment. So we're really just going to talk about the first one. The ruler tool, note tool, and so on, those are pretty self-explanatory if you want to measure something or if you want to add a note to the document and so on. But the eyedropper tool is really important. What it allows you to do is to pick any color in the image and use it. So if I wanted this particular like peach color here, I could take the eyedropper, click here, and you could actually now use this in text, or you could use it with a paintbrush or anything else. So it's very, very useful. If I wanted this brown, I could do it. Let's say, the gray up here, I could use that. So a really valuable thing. It's a very, very old tool, way back to the beginning of Photoshop. And there are a lot of really great options with this. A little tool tip here, and this is something that I can go over in another video if I do kind of a painting video. If you've got any tool that will lay paint down onto the canvas, if you hold down Option, it will give you this little target and you can select a color with the eyedropper tool. So really handy. And if you use this in conjunction with like the swatches palette, you can actually start to create, a library of colors that you associate with this particular image. So there's all sorts of really great things that you can do with this. Plus, you're going to find the eyedropper tool in a variety of different Adobe programs, especially InDesign and Illustrator. So the next set of tools that we're going to talk about are these healing brush tools. But before we do these, I want to show you a tool that is a few tools down, and it is the rubber stamp tool, because you really should understand what the rubber stamp tool does in order to appreciate what these do. So if we look at the rubber stamp tool, you can see that there's the clone stamp tool and the pattern stamp tool. People call it clone stamp or rubber stamp. I'm old enough to be able to call it rubber stamp, but it is the clone stamp tool as well. And what this allows you to do is it allows you to clone pixels. Let's say that I want to clone this object right here. So what I can do with this rubber stamp tool is I have to take a selection first. And the way that you do this is you hold down Option and you click, and then you let up, and then wherever you have your brush, it will begin cloning that object. I'm going to click here, and you can see we've got a little target that's down there indicating where it's cloning from. And if I click down and I just keep moving with this, you can see what it does. It clones that object. Now, what it's really doing is it's not cloning the object, it's just cloning pixels. So it's getting the white pixels around it and so on as well. But we really just can't see that because it's against white, and it kind of looks like we're only doing this object. If we go to the image of the pineapple here, and I take a sample, and I go over here, you can see what it's doing is it's cloning those pixels. So when we go back to here, you can see it's a little bit easier because it's against a white color. Where you really have to be careful with this is that if you're doing any work, let's say that is on a specific pattern, like a grid pattern like this and so on, you can't just go in and take a sample and just start cloning and it's going to look beautiful. So let's say that I've got this line right here that I want to continue. What I would have to do is go in and I would have to take a sample of the line, then make sure to line this up. And what I'm doing is I'm literally cloning the pixels that are below it. You can see even here, it's not perfect at this point. If I took more time, it could be perfect, but it takes a lot of practice to become really good at the rubber stamp tool. I'm pretty good at it because I've been doing this for years. The advantage of it is that it clones pixels perfectly. If I want to clone, similar to what I did with the pineapple, and I just, take something from over here and I just move it to over here, you can see I can do that. This is really good for, doing portrait editing. I mean, it's really good just to know this tool to begin with. Now, the reason that I want you to know what the clone stamp tool is because the healing brushes do things a little bit differently. The healing brush is not necessarily a very accurate tool. It's not a scalpel like the rubber stamp tool is. This is much more of a blunt instrument. What I mean by this is that you're not going to get terribly accurate results, but what you're going to get are very convincing results. So let's go to this first one, which is the spot healing brush. So let's look at this. And let's say that we've got this spot right here on the canvas, and we want to get rid of this. If we use the rubber stamp tool, what we would have to do is make sure that we're taking pixels from a part of this that are the same light or darkness as the ones that we're trying to replace. We would have to really make sure that it's convincing and so on. What the healing brush does is it just says, okay, we're going to look at the pixels around this and we're going to replace them, and we're going to kind of average how light or how dark this area is, and we're just going to get rid of that spot. So if I click down here, you can see here it turns dark gray for a second, you let up, and now that's gone. This is a really powerful tool to know, especially if you do any portrait editing, just any editing in general. It's not like you want to choose the rubber stamp tool or the healing brush to learn. You really need to learn them both. If I want to go here and take care of this highlight, I can make the brush bigger here, click, let go, it gets rid of that highlight. So what it's doing is exactly what I said before. It's looking at the pixels inside of this brush size. It's saying, okay, the majority are this value of gray, and we're going to get rid of anything in it that is either lighter or darker than this gray. And we're just going to kind of mix the pixels together. Now, what you want to do with this is you want to use this sparingly, and you really want to be accurate with it as much as what you can. So you can see here, I'm getting rid of all of these little dots here and so on. What you don't want to do is you don't want to just click down and do stuff like this. Because you can see here, we're starting to get errors in the way that this tool is handling this area. This tool does not handle straight lines very well. This is meant to handle areas that do not have straight edges. For straight edges, you want the rubber stamp tool whenever you're working with something like this. So the difference between the spot healing brush and the healing brush tool is the spot healing brush, the one that we've been using so far, just gives you a brush and the brush size, anything within that size, you click down and it gets rid of that. But it's only averaging the pixels inside of that brush. The difference between that and the healing brush is that the healing brush allows you, very similar to the rubber stamp tool, it allows you to take a sample of another area, use those pixels to heal another area. So in other words, down here, instead of with the spot healing brush where we're just averaging the pixels inside of the brush, now what we can do is we can go to the healing brush tool, say, you know what, I don't want the pixels here for whatever reason, and I want to take the ones from up here. So I'm holding down Option, I'm clicking, and now I can use the pixels from there to replace the ones down here, and it will match how light or how dark it is. The patch tool basically mixes the functionality of the lasso tool and the healing brush tool. So the patch tool, what this allows you to do is surround an area that you want healed. Then what you can do is click inside of this area that you just selected, drag it, and it will replace the pixels down here with the pixels up here, and it will match the lightness and darkness of it. So we essentially just got rid of that. And I could do it down here. Now, one of the functions that you want to be aware of is that you have source and destination. Essentially what this means, if we have destination, what we can do is choose pixels that are over here and then drag those on top of whatever object we want to get rid of, and it will get rid of those. These are really, really powerful editing tools. And if I ever do an editing video where we're talking about just products or skin or whatever else, we'll really go in depth into how these tools work. Again, this is just kind of an overview of the tools in the toolbar. I wanted to say thank you for watching part 1 of the 3-part series on the Adobe Photoshop toolbar. The following episodes have already been shot and they're in editing at the moment, so those should be coming out pretty soon. But hopefully you enjoyed this one, you learned something, and I will see you later.